All right, guys, welcome. Continuing with Unit 2 onto ancient Greece. And as I told you in the last recording, a lot of similarities between ancient Israel and ancient Greece, specifically in the fact that these are two numerically pretty small groups of people with huge influence and impact on our culture and society today. So we'll kind of look at the Greeks through that same prism, less about the specifics about, people and places and battles and things like that going on in ancient Greece thousands of years ago. That might be interesting to some people. What I think is much more valuable for you, though, is to consider how the ideas that they introduced are still shaping our society today. So, one important thing that the text points out right off the bat is the geographical fragmentation. We talked the very first unit, I listed geography as one of those big picture things, concepts that will kind of be in the background of every specific thing that we study. And, the geographical reality of just the earth, it shapes culture in a lot of different ways. And so with Greece, they talk about the geographical fragmentation. You can see, the series of islands here, and then even in the mainland of the Greek peninsula, over to the left on this map, you can't really make out the detail that well on this image, but it's very mountainous. So those are two facts of geography, right? You have islands that are obviously separated from each other from by water, right? And then even on a larger piece of mainland territory, there's a lot of mountains. So those two geographical facts mean that, as they say, Greece was fragmented. Islands are fragmented because they're separate from each other. And even on the mainland, different cities might be fragmented or separated by mountain ranges, for example. So especially, thousands of years ago, before, well, air travel, obviously, what we now call Greece, it's not all that big of a place. But back then, it would have seemed a lot bigger because, practically speaking, it would have been a lot more difficult to travel from one part of this map to another. So, for almost everything we talk about in this unit, when we're talking about Greece, we're not talking about one thing. We're talking about a collection of things that, even though they might have lived close to each other as the bird flies, it wasn't a united country the way it is now for most of the period that we're going to cover here. So again, geography impacts a lot more than people might think. The polis. Uh, so polis is a Greek word for a city-state. And there were many, many different Greek city-states. The two most well-known, most studied, most talked about are Sparta and Athens. There were many, many more. But again, a reminder that Greece, ancient Greece, was more a collection of independent cities than a united modern nation for most of the period that we're going to cover here. Okay. So polis, that's a Greek word. Again, it means city-state. If you think about the modern United States, there are certain cities in our country that actually use that Greek term polis in the name of the city. If you think about Minneapolis, Indianapolis is probably the most on the nose one, right? Indianapolis, Indiana City. Polis is also the root of many other English words, police, politics, right? So one of the big contributions of Greek culture that's still very much with us is language. An acropolis, I'll show you some photographs a little bit later, but an acropolis, so polis is city. Acro, that prefix means high or elevated, right? So an acropolis, a high city. At the center of every city-state would be what they called the Acropolis. And essentially, any naturally elevated spot, a hill that's higher than the surrounding countryside, on that high elevated place, the Greeks would center their city and they would put on the acro, on the high place, whatever's most valuable to them. Religious temples, any valuable resources that they might have. The rich people would live up there. Higher places are easier to defend. through all of human history and throughout the entire history of warfare until the 20th century, when now we have bombers, higher places are much easier to defend. You can shoot down on people, right? So the Acropolis, the high city, that's going to be at the center where the most valuable stuff, however that city defines that, that's where that's going to be, right? So acro, high. Another Greek word that I know you've all heard is phobia, right? A phobia is a fear. Acrophobia, fear of heights, right? So we see these Greek words and prefixes and suffixes all over the place. Agora, that would be kind of the wide open, low-lying areas below the Acropolis, and it'd be harder to defend, right? Big, wide open places. That's where the more poor people would live, right? They couldn't afford to live on the Acropolis. They'd live down in the Agora. And again, agoraphobia, fear of big, wide open places, the opposite of claustrophobia. Democracy, that's a word you've all heard a billion times. We're going to spend some time talking about that in a minute, what it means, what it is, what it isn't. There are different types, but that's originally a Greek word, right? Demos meaning people. Oligarchy. So a monarchy, which isn't on this list, but you know that term, monarchy, ruled by one king or a queen usually. Democracy is ruled by the people. And in between those two things, you have this idea of oligarchy. And an oligarchy is basically not one person in charge and not the whole people in charge, but a small group of people in charge. So it's kind of this midway point between monarchy and democracy. And that's also a Greek word. A lot of people, if you want to look into this, a lot of people today argue that the United States is actually an oligarchy, where we have, for example, I think I showed you these statistics earlier in a different context. We have 1% of our population with 40% of the wealth, something like that. A lot of people argue that in reality, we are an oligarchy. We have a small group of people that really hold all the power. Whether that's true or not is obviously up for you to assess. But democracy, everyone knows the word, everyone throws it around all over the place, everyone has a reflexively positive view of it. But let's stipulate what it is, because there are different types. There's two specific types of democracy, basically. Direct and indirect or representative, also known as a republic. So let's start with direct. In a direct democracy, citizens vote directly to decide issues. So if you were to ask, you know, a 6-year-old, explain democracy, this is basically, they would probably explain direct democracy. If you have a group of people that need to make a decision, everybody gets to vote on what the decision is going to be, right? And then whoever has the most votes, that's the decision. That's direct democracy. It's very basic. But what is really important to stipulate here is that in the United States, we do not have a direct democracy. We don't. In ancient Athens, that famous Greek city-state, they did. What we have instead is a representative democracy or an indirect democracy or a republic. We get to vote, as you know, but when we vote in elections in our country, we're not voting on decisions. We're voting, right? We don't directly choose what our country is going to do. We indirectly choose. We vote for representatives. We vote for mayors and senators and presidents. We vote for people who then make the decisions for us. So there's separation there. We don't vote directly on, is our country going to go to war? We vote for people to represent us in our city hall, in our state house, in our federal government. And those people decide what we're doing, not us. So let's break this down a little. So in ancient Athens, they had a direct democracy. The citizens not all the people, the citizens, and most people weren't citizens, but the citizens voted directly in ancient Athens to make decisions. So, for example, if it's a question of is Athens going to go to war, the citizens would get together, they would vote yes or no, and that would be the decision. Now, we don't do that in this country. And so what I would want you to consider is why don't we have a direct democracy? And there are many different theories. There are many reasons. Some of the major ones I would ask you to consider, and again, think about, as always, do you agree? Do you disagree? Does it make sense to you? In this case, should we have a direct democracy? Do you understand why we don't? Are the reasons for not doing it, in your opinion, legitimate? Would be better off with one, et cetera, et cetera. So in this country, why don't we have a direct democracy? Here are some possible explanations that you should think through. Number one, ancient Athens, that was a city, not a continent-sized nation, but a city with a limited number of people. Pretty small place. And so you might consider a direct democracy could be practical if we didn't have 330 million people. Right? The United States is huge and we have an enormous population. So question one, in your opinion, would it be reasonable, practical, workable to have every citizen vote on every issue in a country this massive? Because ancient Athens, if there's something that needs to be voted on, hey, everyone show up tomorrow and vote. And that's not that difficult to pull off. How do we do that in a country this big and this populated? That's just a practical reason. Okay. Another reason might be more rhetorical. So let me ask you a rhetorical question. Do you trust the average American citizen to make really important decisions that affect all of us? The average American citizen, the person in front of you and behind you in the Dunkin' Donuts drive-thru. Total stranger, just average random person in Walmart. Do you trust the average American citizen to be making life and death decisions that affect all of us? Yes or no? If you say no, probably a pretty good idea we don't have a direct democracy. Now, if you say no, you don't trust the average American citizen to make good decisions for all of us. Okay, then let's take it a layer deeper. Um, Follow-up number one. Let's assume that you don't trust the average citizen to have that kind of power to make decisions that affect everybody else. Maybe you do, but let's assume for the sake of argument you don't. Follow-up question number one. Why not? Is it because they're stupid or is it because they're uninformed? And there's a difference. We talked about specialization of labor earlier. If you don't trust the average person to make informed decisions, is it because they're stupid or is it because they're uninformed? Stupid is stupid. Some people are just born stupid. Um, that's just the nature of the world. They're out there. Uninformed is something very different. Uninformed doesn't mean stupid. Think about specialization of labor. I am uninformed. Well, some may say I'm stupid, but I'm definitely uninformed about a great number of things. I'm uninformed about chemistry. I'm uninformed about computer programming. I'm uninformed about environmental issues. I'm uninformed about being a veterinarian. If your horse gets sick, sorry, can't do anything for you. I'm uninformed about a lot of stuff, right? Specialization of labor. We each focus on certain things in our economy, and we depend on other people to know how to do other stuff. So one argument against direct democracy is not that average people are stupid. It's that the average person, you, me, everyone else, we're busy. We got school, we got jobs, we got kids, we got stuff going on. We don't have the time to inform ourselves about every little thing that the government has to do. Does this make sense? This is why, from a certain point of view, this is why we hire representatives to make these decisions for us, because in theory, the representatives are the experts. They're the specialists, right? When your car breaks down, you go to the mechanic. You don't pick a random person off the street and say, "Hey, can you fix my car?" And so, in theory, the argument for representative democracy is about specialization of labor. A certain number of people in our country specialize in knowing how government should operate. And we give them the authority to do that. And then we give doctors the authority to do surgery and on and on and on, right? So, should we have direct democracy? Maybe yes, maybe no. If no, is it because the average person is stupid, or is it because the average person is too busy to inform themselves on how to do it? So we hire the specialists. Now, another question. If you don't trust the average person to run our government because they're not informed or they're stupid or whatever it is, okay, do you trust politicians? Do you think that the politicians that you are aware of are really, really, really smart? Do you think they're experts in what they do? Are they doing a great job? Do you think our politicians are smarter than the average person and better informed and more honest and virtuous? I mean, if you do, I'm happy for you. But here's the paradox. Most Americans don't trust the average person to make decisions like this. And also at the same time, most Americans really don't trust politicians. You see the paradox? So what do we do there? We got to pick one. If we're going to have a democracy, we need to pick one. Do we want the average people in charge or do we want the politicians in charge? There are pros and cons to either, but think that through. All right. In ancient Athens, it was the people. They made decisions directly. We don't do that. Maybe we should. So, two different types of democracy. All right. Direct. And direct, the people are the government. The people basically are the senators. They decide directly. In our system, again, we have this separation. The elected representative makes decisions for us. We don't do it directly. So it's important to distinguish between these two types. Now, again, democracy for most people in this country tends to have a pretty positive reputation. Fine. There is a danger in democracy. And one of the ways that danger is sometimes explained is democracy can turn into two wolves and a sheep voting on what's for dinner. All right. And I think the metaphor is pretty straightforward, but let's just make sure. In this hypothetical situation, you have two wolves and a sheep, and you're going to set up a democratic process for making decisions because democracy is good, right? Okay. How is this vote going to end out? We all know, right? The wolves are going to vote to eat the sheep. The sheep is going to vote to eat something else. Let's eat some grass. And in a democratic process, the wolves are going to win, and that's democracy. That's fair, right? The sheep got to vote. The sheep's rights were upheld. Sheep got to vote. But in democracy, somebody's going to lose. Sorry. Now, when the wolves eat the sheep, is that democracy? It is. It is democracy. But is that good? So in this metaphor, the sheep represents the loser in a democratic process. Or maybe the sheep represents a minority group who is outnumbered. And maybe the majority group votes democratically to kill the sheep. Is that democracy? Yeah, it is, actually. But is that good? So, one of the things that democracy requires to be something that most people think highly of would be protections against it turning into what's sometimes called mob rule or the tyranny of the majority. Just because you're in the majority, just because you win an election, or you're part of a group that outnumbers another group, that does not mean that you should be able to, you name it, enslave, kill, abuse, rob, whatever it is, the smaller group. So democracy is great, but pure democracy without any protection for people who are outvoted, that that can get pretty dark, right? And there's no shortage in history of that happening. In the United States, why was slavery legal in a democracy? Because the majority said so. That was democratic. Wasn't good though. So it may be a great system, but I want to make sure we're clear on two things. Number one, there's two types, direct and representative. And number two, whichever type you prefer, we have to have built-in protections for people that are outvoted, or else it's just tyranny. The different city-states were divided for the majority of ancient Greek history. And this is kind of just human nature, I think. What, so let's say the Greeks, they're sometimes, the ancient Greeks, they're sometimes referred to as like a dysfunctional family, right? They're related, but they're always fighting. And this is human nature, I think. What, if you're in a dispute with your friends or your family or people that you're close to, what is the quickest, most direct way to end that internal fight? And usually it's an outside threat, right? You're bickering with your brother and sister, whatever it is, but then someone from outside the family starts attacking one of you, and now your internal family feud is paused, right? Maybe not ended forever, but it's definitely paused, right? And this is what happened in ancient Greece. One of the few things that would unite the Greek city-states is if they were attacked from outside. Makes sense, right? And so in one famous case, it was the Persian Empire, which you can see on this map. It was massive at the time. And there's a really well-known story in history and in pop culture, because there were movies about it made recently in the United States, the 300. If you've ever seen those movies, they're absurd, but they're super entertaining. Um, and they're about Sparta. Sparta was a Greek city-state. Greece is being invaded, and the city-states need to band together. And Sparta had the best warriors. And it's just a matter of human history and human nature that when countries are divided from within, very often we'll see that if they get attacked from without, that internal division will go away, at least in the short term, right? Another thing that ancient Athens is best known for is philosophy. All right, so that's another Greek word. You got a prefix, you got a suffix. Philo is love. Sophia is wisdom, right? Philosophy is the love of wisdom. And this is an example of, we could do an entire course on ancient Greek philosophy. Um, the three major philosophers from this period that are best known, that probably sound familiar to you, are Plato, Socrates, and Aristotle. Their contributions to human thought, yeah, I mean, again, you could spend an entire semester on any one of these three individuals and never scratch the surface. Okay. They're kind of a big deal, as they say. Now, so we don't have 40 hours to study Aristotle, so we'll go through these three guys in like 10 minutes. Um, the idea that the Greeks were famous for philosophy, but also for the Spartan warriors from the 300. There is a wide diversity among the Greek city-states and what they're known for. Okay. And I just want to point something out about civilization. You had, and I'm going to oversimplify this a little bit just to make a point. You had ancient Athens. What are they known for? These romantic intellectual things, democracy, philosophy, all this nice stuff, right? What are the Spartans known for? Being hardcore killers. If your country gets invaded, you don't need philosophers. You need hardcore killers. You need the Spartans. Any society needs a group of people who are killers. And that's the only way a society is able to protect the things that make that society great, like ideas and debates and art and all that beautiful stuff. Because the stuff that ancient Athens is known for, it's great and virtuous and beautiful and interesting. But if your country gets invaded, you don't need Aristotle. You need a hardcore, trained from childbirth killer to protect what it is that makes your country great. So that's the kind of weird interplay between Sparta and Athens and why people usually focus on both of them. They're both essential for ancient Greece to be what it was. So Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, let's go over really quick. Socrates, what's he known for? Socratic method. That's the idea that education should be about asking questions rather than telling facts. Now, in an asynchronous format like this, I can't ask you questions directly, and that's the one thing I miss most about this format. Um, when I'm in the classroom, I'm asking questions way more than I'm talking at people. This is how a really effective education happens, is by the student being asked questions, hypothetical questions, rhetorical questions, devil's advocate questions. What about this? What about that? That's what stimulates learning. Um, that stimulates creative analytical thought. If your teacher or professor in a classroom poses a question, even if you don't answer it directly, if you listen to it and think about how would I answer this if I were put on the spot, just being asked the question, neurologically, stuff starts firing off in your brain because you have to think analytically and creatively versus when you're just being spoken to, your brain is just kind of running on neutral. It's not, and we know this now because we can, through modern technology, we can look at certain brain activity. What starts firing neurons off in your brain uh, when people ask you questions, not as much when people just tell you stuff, right? People learn and grow and engage with the world by being asked questions. It's human nature. Socrates understood this thousands of years ago. If you go out on a first date with someone and never ask them any questions, there will not be a second date. Um, I want to say one more thing about Socrates and democracy. Socrates urged his students to ask questions, to challenge authority, to not just believe things because someone said it was so. And Socrates was executed. His fellow citizens voted democratically to kill him for encouraging young people to question authority. So that was a democratic process in which the mob decided to kill someone by voting on it. Plato, Platonic ideals. Um, this is such a great life lesson in so many ways. There's so much here. Envision the ideal. The ideal is how the world should be. We all have opinions on how we can improve the world, whether macro, big picture stuff, or micro, our personal lives. How could the world be better in your opinion? And try to bring that more perfect, that better world into existence. Don't just accept the world as you find it, in other words. Don't be fatalistic. This is what Plato was saying thousands of years ago. Don't be fatalistic. Don't just accept things as they, oh, it is what it is, right? That's fatalistic. No. If you don't like something about your personal life or the world at large, don't just complain about it. Don't just accept it. Don't be fatalistic. Take agency, think about how it could be better, and try to make it better. And it's a process. It's a very slow process, and you will never fully accomplish your goal, ever. What would a perfect world look like? Whatever your answer is to that question, I regret to inform you, my friends, it's not going to happen. But that does not mean you don't try, because if you improve the world by, a half a percentage point, that's a big deal because that stuff adds up over time. So Plato is saying so much here that's really important uh, life lesson for all of us, I think. Identify things that could be better and don't just throw up your hands and complain and accept it. Try to improve it. And if you do, again, if you make it just a teeny, teeny sliver better, that stuff adds up over time. It does. That's why we have the incredible society we have today, rather than living in caves and having half of our children die of ear infections before they're 5 years old. We've made a lot of progress because we don't accept the world as it is. If we do, there is no progress. Second step, after you take on that attitude, don't make the perfect the enemy of the good. There is no such thing as perfection. If your standard is you will only accept perfection, you are going to live a miserable life. You will never be satisfied. Nothing is perfect. Don't expect perfection. You can envision it and you can try to get a little closer to it. That's great. But don't expect that you're going to find perfection in any walk of life. You want to wait to get married until you find the perfect spouse, you're going to die alone. You want to wait to get a job until you find the perfect job, you're going to be unemployed for your whole life. It's not how the world works. Don't make the perfect the enemy of the good. If you find something good, embrace it. Don't reject it because it's not perfect, because nothing's perfect. So these are really just, I think, basic habits of minds and ways to live a more fulfilling life that Plato was thinking and writing about thousands of years ago. In terms of how this applies to something we talked about earlier, how do we know if something is true? You can apply Platonic ideals to that as well. You can demand evidence, but again, don't expect perfect evidence because nothing is ever perfect. So, a couple random questions from history that we can ask and then apply Platonic ideals. Did Hitler know about the Holocaust? Most people would just say, "Oh, of course, obviously he did." Of course it is. It's a stupid question, right? But if you demand perfect evidence, then you can get jammed up into this incoherent, just you can't make sense of anything if you want perfection, because there is no perfection. In this context, did Hitler know about the Holocaust? Obviously, but if you play this game of, well, show me perfect evidence, show me a video of him ordering the Holocaust, doesn't exist. Show me a document where he orders the Holocaust and then signs his name on the bottom. That document doesn't exist. Does that mean he didn't know about it? No, that's stupid. Right? So if you get hung up in demanding perfect anything, perfect evidence, perfect weather, perfect car, whatever it is, it's not going to happen. You got to use your common sense. You got to not sell yourself short. You got to accept good things. They can always be better. You can improve good things, but don't reject good things under the excuse of they're not perfect. Did George Washington exist? Again, obviously, yes, but we can play that stupid game, right? Show me a photograph. Is there life on other planets? Sometimes there's no evidence. Sometimes Platonic ideals is we don't even know what good looks like in terms of evidence. Just go with your gut, right? A lot of life decisions, you got to go with your gut. So Platonic ideals, there's a ton there. Don't expect perfection. That doesn't mean tolerate terrible things under the excuse of nothing's perfect. It's a very delicate balance. Try to make the world, try to make your life better 1 inch at a time, but be realistic about your limits, right? There's a ton there. And that's why people study Plato, Socrates, and Aristotle to this day. Greek mythology, similar to Jewish stories, there's something about Greek stories that just universally appealing. They're all throughout our culture. Greek mythology is it's one of those things. It's like the stories from the Old Testament of the Bible. Something about them. They appeal to people way beyond the time and the place and the context in which they were written. And they're all throughout our culture. Uh, and another similarity, like statistically, we covered this last time. Statistically, very, very few people are Jewish, but statistically, huge numbers of people know Jewish stories. Statistically, do you know anyone who actually worships Greek gods? Has like a little shrine to Hercules in their room or something? Probably not. But most of us know the stories, at least some of them. In our culture, thousands of years later, the hold that Greek mythology has, it's all over the place. Our space program, our early manned space program in the 1960s, leading up to the moon landings, Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, it's all Greek mythology. It's everywhere in our culture. Sports, major part of our culture to this day. Um, the Olympic Games, specifically, sports in general, big part of our culture. We can trace that, and the Greeks didn't invent sports, but they really revolutionized it as this big, huge cultural driver, right? The Olympic Games. So the Greeks did invent the Olympic Games, and Olympic Games are still with us, as you know. And the premise behind the Olympics then and now is that every now and then we should get together and peacefully compete in sports, even if we don't get along with each other. And so back then it was all the ancient Greek city-states that would compete, even if they often fought. Sometimes let's put our conflicts aside and peacefully compete in athletics. And same thing with the modern Olympics. There's lots of countries in the modern Olympics that the governments of which are at war, but they can compete peacefully every couple of years, right? Let's put politics aside, let's put war aside, let's put our differences aside. Let's get together and compete peacefully in sports. It's important. A lot of the events are the same as they were thousands of years ago. New events are always being added. Some of them aren't even sports. There's some weird new Olympic events that have been added. Um, but the premise is the same. One of the events, just to show you another quick example of the dominance of Greek history and culture in our current culture, the marathon. That was an Olympic event back then. It's an Olympic event now. In the original story, there was a battle at Marathon. Marathon's a place in Greece. And a messenger had to run to Athens to tell the people the outcome of the battle, because that was the only way to communicate back then. You had to carry the message. So the runner ran 26 miles, right? That's the distance of the marathon from Marathons to Athens. And he proceeded to collapse and die, as I would if I tried to do that. And but the story goes, before he collapsed, he yelled out a single word. And this single word maybe is the best example of how ancient Greek culture is literally everywhere. You just got to know how to look for it. The word this runner yelled out after running the marathon was the Greek word for victory, which is a word that all of you know, and many of you probably literally are wearing it right now. Nike. Nike. Again, I'm not a gambling man, but the odds that there's anyone watching this that has never owned a piece of clothing with that word on it is probably zero. We talked earlier about the Acropolis, the high city. So this is a picture of one. Um, you can see lower half of the picture, a naturally occurring elevated rocky hill. And then on top of that, an obviously man-made extension of it, right? That would be the Acropolis. And you would see these in any ancient Greek city. Um, Theater, another huge practice of the Greeks that we can trace all the way up to our current culture and civilization. Here's a restored one. So you can see some connections to things that would be very recognizable to this day in our culture. You got the stage, obviously, you got the little orchestra pit thing. The seating, the way it's arranged, the way this place is designed, it's designed so that every seat, as much as possible, has direct line of sight to the stage. It's designed with acoustics in mind. There are rows of seats, obviously, and there are aisles cutting vertically up and down. I mean, the way that's laid out, aside from the fact that in the United States there wouldn't be benches, there would be separate individual seats. Aside from that, with the aisles and the rows and this and that, that is instantly recognizable to all of you as a place where you would go to watch a sporting event or a concert or a play. It's all right there, right? If it works, it works. And the Greeks knew how to set up, again, a perfect venue for whether we're concerned with line of sight, if it's a sporting event, whether we're concerned with acoustics, if it's music, whatever it is, or you're listening to speeches, it's all right there, right? You can almost picture someone walking up and down one of those aisles selling beer and hot dogs or something. Now, in terms of the theater, which is one thing that they would do, obviously, in those venues, the Greeks were very well known for their theater, for their plays. And there are three Greek, again, Greek words that you've all heard that describe kind of different types of stories. A story could be a drama, it could be a comedy, it could be a tragedy. The other uh, relevant thing I think you might find interesting is this three-act structure that the Greeks followed in a lot of their plays. Now, let's think about uh, movies rather than plays, right? Movies are our modern cultural equivalent of plays, basically, right? Think about any movie you're familiar with. Think about your your favorite movie and think about how closely it aligns with this three-act structure. It's not going to be 100% exact, but it's going to be close. So, for example, think about the fact that most American movies are, let's say, between an hour and a half to 2 hours long. So divide that by three. You're talking about most American movies are three-act structures where each act is about a half hour or 40 minutes. Okay, that's how we end up with an hour and a half to 2 hour movie. Act one, the setup, beginning, duh. Inciting incident, second thoughts. All right, you introduce the characters, you introduce the conflict. What's the movie gonna be about? All right, and something happens midway, a little bit less than that. Something happens at the beginning of the first act. What's the inciting incident that kind of pops things off? In a lot of the old Disney movies, the inciting incident is someone's mother dies or father, right? In Bambi, that's the inciting incident. In The Lion King, that's the inciting incident, right? In the original Star Wars movie, Luke's aunt and uncle get killed. There's something that happens to the main character pretty early in the movie that's going to kind of set them off on this journey. Act two, confrontation. There's obstacles, right? Where the main characters are struggling with whatever it might be. Big twist, disaster, crisis. So towards the end of the second act, very often there seems to be this kind of insurmountable problem. Like, oh man, to build the suspense, like how are they going to figure this out in act three? In a romantic comedy movie, for example, the disaster or crisis at the end of Act Two is they break up, right? So whether it's a comedy, whether it's a drama, any genre of movies is going to generally follow this structure. And then in Act Three, of course, there's the resolution. A lot of the loose ends are tied up. There's a climate or a climax rather, and then we kind of wrap up. And so again, if you want to look into this next time you watch a movie or just think about a movie you know really well that you've seen a bunch of times, there's going to be a lot of overlap between that movie and this structure. The other thing I'll add is that they're less common now, but back in the day, in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, um, trilogies were much more common. All right, movie trilogies. Now they just never stop, right? But a self-contained trilogy that's set up to be a trilogy and is not supposed to have a fourth, fifth, 10th installment. Those were quite common, and a trilogy itself is a three-act structure. So if you're familiar with any movie trilogies, each movie in the trilogy is going to follow the three-act structure within itself. But then if you zoom out and look at the whole trilogy, each movie is an act in the three-act structure. All right. So if you are familiar with the original Star Wars trilogy, which you should be, episodes four, five, and six, Each individual movie follows a three-act structure, but also when you zoom out, the first movie is Act One. The second movie is Act Two, the confrontation, the big twist. What's the big twist? Darth Vader is Luke Skywalker's father. And then Act Three is the resolution. So you'll see this structure in a lot of stories. Uh, Architecture, again, the material, the use of columns and pillars, you would see this kind of architecture in a lot of modern American government buildings. This spread eventually throughout all of the Roman Empire and beyond, right? Some of the best sculpture before the Renaissance, which we'll cover later in the course. So the Greeks contributed a lot, all right? Philosophy, democracy, military tactics, art and architecture, sports, and on and on and on and on and on, right? Language. Now I'll end with this thesis. It's not a statement of fact. Throughout this course, we'll cover this a lot, but let me just preview this. I will always be very intentional about distinguishing between facts and opinion. I don't present opinions to you and pretend that they're facts. All right. I want to be very explicit about that. This top point here, Western civilization is founded on these things. It's an opinion. It's a thesis statement. Whether it's my opinion or not should be irrelevant to you. It's an opinion a lot of people have, and I want you to think it through and not just be like, oh, okay, let me write that down. That's a fact. It's not a fact. It's a point of view. So I'll walk you through it, and you tell me whether you think there's anything to it. Western civilization is founded on, from a certain point of view, two things, and they're the two things we just covered, ancient Israel and ancient Greece. Jerusalem, that's shorthand for, that's the capital of Israel, right? So Jerusalem, that's shorthand for Israel, the Jews. And what are they most well known for contributing from this point of view? Revelation, religion. Okay. That's one pillar. The other pillar that our civilization is founded on, from this perspective, is ancient Greece, Athens. What are they known for? Shorthand. Uh, Rational thought, philosophy, let's say science. So let me paraphrase this for you. Our civilization is built on religion and science. We'll get into this in great depth towards the end of the course. And again, for like the fifth time, this is a theory, not a fact. You are obviously free to disagree with this. This theory holds that our civilization is built on these two foundations, revelation or religion and reason or science. And the theory says that they are both necessary because one without the other is problematic. Revelation or religion without science or reason equals what? Well, the theory is if you have a religious society with no science, people might treat each other well, which is super important, but there won't be much material progress without reason or science. So we'd be missing out on a lot. If we have the other one without the other, if we have reason or science without religion, then this theory holds that science without religion and all that comes with religion, moral teachings, et cetera, um, science without religion, oh boy. So we might be able to invent nuclear weapons because we have science, but if we don't have religion, that might not be so great. Now, this thesis does conflate moral behavior with religion. I don't know if you picked up on that. And obviously, a lot of people would reject that idea. A lot of people would say you can have good moral behavior without religious beliefs. A lot of people believe that. That's fine. It's a theory. So think that through. These last two civilizations that we covered, the Jews and the Greeks, again, their impact is unbelievable. It's huge. They've contributed different things that still swirl all around us. Um, what in your mind though, what do you make out of this thesis? Is it is our civilization built on religion and science? Are they both equally necessary, in your opinion? Is one more necessary than the other? Should we throw one out entirely and just pursue the other? All right, people are all over the place on this question, which is why I thought it'd be a good time to ask you to think about it. And towards the end of the course, as new technology is invented and new discoveries are made, this battle, this debate between science and religion really, really heats up. All right, so we'll cover that in more depth later in the course. All right, next up is ancient Rome, and I will see you next time.